Hello, I'm Lauren Goodrich, and today I'm joined by my colleague Tack. Today we're going to be discussing the Collective Security Treaty Organization, or better known as the CSTO, which is Russia's military bloc within the region, within the context of the recent conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, and within the context of NATO itself. So, the CSTO really came out of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, in which Russia needed a collective military bloc to inherit the security guarantees it had before. And so the bloc today consists of Russia, Belarus, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Kazakhstan. And collectively, they have formed together pretty much underneath Russia's insistence in a way for Russia to really spread its influence within these countries militarily. Now, these countries see it as a way to pretty much have Russia's guarantee to have Russia's security in case they need help with external threats itself.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, we've seen the CSTO being set up in similar ways to NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was originally set up back in the days of the Warsaw Pact to balance the power, the military power that was being built around Russia. But the concepts are very similar. We're talking about collective security, where several states join their strength to deter any potential military action against them. Now, the way we've seen that evolve, of course, we've seen NATO focus more on potential cooperations outside of the NATO borders, become more of a military coordination and pooling system rather than a hardcore defensive alliance.
Yeah, and we haven't really seen the CSTO really use its collective defense either. We've seen the CSTO do a lot of exercises. We've seen them organize together, but we haven't seen them really band together. This was really seen especially in 2010 when Kyrgyzstan faced a lot of border conflicts and internal conflicts taking place, in which it called on the CSTO to really support it in its standoff with Uzbekistan, its neighbor, who had pulled out of the CSTO at that time. But instead, the CSTO members didn't quite follow through. And that's when we had the CSTO kind of change its articles and have amendments in which they went from a collective defense to a collaborative defense, which gives it a lot of wiggle room to pick and choose on where they want to really operate together and where they want to step back and have the countries kind of fend for themselves. That was seen this past week, in which Armenia and Azerbaijan had their break in their ceasefire in the worst fighting we've seen since 1994 in Nagorno-Karabakh. And there was discussions between Armenia and the CSTO on the very first day of fighting. However, we didn't see CSTO really come to the aid of Armenia. And there was a lot within the Armenian media wondering where CSTO was.
And that's been one of the constant challenges of alliances like this, where there's a lot of political capital involved in actually stepping up to the plate and saying, oh, now we are joining in the fight to support our partner. Something similar that we've seen in NATO, when, for example, just recently during the Syria crisis, Turkey has been asking NATO to come to its aid. But the way that these alliances are set up, the way the legal structure is set up, there's no enforcement mechanism that says, when some certain event happens, everyone has to do this particular reaction.
So has NATO ever used collective defense?
So the Article 5, which actually describes that response, has been invoked just once after the 9/11 attacks in the United States, after which NATO air forces supported the monitoring of U.S. airspace, as well as a naval operation in the Mediterranean to interdict the mobility of potential terrorists. But in reality, when you think of it, that was not the type of use case that NATO was created for. It was a very exceptional way to use it, mostly a show of support of NATO after the 9/11 attacks.
Not like the collective defense that was intended against the Soviet Union.
Exactly. And we've never actually seen a real threat to that case. So we've never seen an attack of NATO territory that would have warranted the full strength of Article 5.
Yeah, par on par militaries.
Exactly. And once that happens, that's when we'll see how effective NATO really is. And that's kind of the same situation with the CSTO right now, where the fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh technically isn't taking place within Armenia.
True.
And there's a lot of gray areas where countries can, kind of weasel out their commitment to the alliances, but the viability of these alliances will only really be shown once they are challenged to that core value of their treaties.
But there are other benefits to being a part of these organizations. For the CSTO members, it's helped them with training, joint air defense systems. It has also helped them in creating counterterrorism exercises and training, which especially countries in Central Asia really need at this time as they border Afghanistan and see increased of radical Islam in the region. So there is great benefits, at least within the CSTO, to be a member.
No, definitely. And even outside of the CSTO, when we look at NATO, there's great benefit to be had from joint purchases of equipment, from those joint exercises, having the ability for countries to interact easily on a military level by having a constant interaction. That's worth a lot. Intelligence sharing between these countries, for example, and that even goes beyond the military level. The concept of combining your most essential elements of sovereignty and cooperating on those levels, it allows a lot of scale advantages, basically.
So what's the future viability of both these organizations?
Well, that's what we'll have to see as things play out. But in reality, as we've mentioned before, the big challenge to the core of these treaties, where when either the CSTO or NATO is challenged by an outside actor that invades some of their territory, that's when we'll see will these countries actually stand up and fight? Mm-hmm. And that's where NATO faces some very severe difficulties, as they have a very diverse group of countries combining into their decision-making organs, and they have to make a unanimous decision.
Which is very different than the CSTO,
yes.
which is very Russia, Moscow-led, and it's pretty much Moscow making the decision at the end of the day on whether CSTO gets involved in anything from Nagorno-Karabakh or within Central Asia. Well, thank you so much, Sim, for joining me today. For more information, please go to stratfor.com.